Hi everyone and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'm Agnes Borg from EFIB and I will be leading you through the session today. And we are super excited to have kicked off the EFIB 2021 journey, and today's webinar, co-hosted with DSM and Planet Bio, is an important part of this. And as you know, the theme of today is how to accelerate biotech innovation for a sustainable future. And indeed, in view of a complex context with global and European sustainability goals and targets, where a range of solutions will be needed, industrial biotechnology is positioned very well to help meet the objectives of the Green Deal through a range of applications to reduce carbon footprint, enabling a circular economy, and in the context of a more sustainable food system. And we will be looking at different aspects of today's theme in the session, and this includes the role of strategic processes and platforms to accelerate ideas going from lab to market, and how corporate startups and investors evaluate cooperation needs and challenges. And you have the agenda for the day shown here now on the slide. And after an introduction from EFIB, we will have industry, startup, and VC perspectives. And then we will move on to a discussion of up to 45 minutes. And before we kick off on the next slide, we are very pleased to see so many of you with us today for this webinar. And just to remind you that there is both a chat function and a Q&A function. And you can pose questions to our speakers in the Q&A function. And please also indicate if you have one of the panelists that your question is specifically directed towards. So we will now start with our presentations, and I will now hand over to Claire Scantlebury, who is Director General at EFIB for her introductory talk and also with an outlook to EFIB 2021.
Thanks very much indeed, Agnes. And I'm just going to give a lightning quick tour through EFIB because it's going to be fantastic this year. I am absolutely delighted that we can move back, hopefully, to a face-to-face format for the event. And I think we are all very much looking forward to coming together to network directly again. As much as the online versions have been incredibly efficient and we haven't had to go very far, we have certainly all really missed the face-to-face value that you gain. So we look forward very much to EFIB this year, and I'm delighted that we'll be hosted by Lisa Vienna, representing life science in Austria, because Austria has a really strong biotechnology landscape and it's positioned incredibly well within this sort of industrial heartland of Europe. So we're delighted to be partnering with them. And obviously, Vienna is a fantastic city to come back to. And especially if you're traveling from Brussels with the launch of the night train between Brussels and Vienna, it's worth going just to go that way. So what do we have to offer for you in EFIB this year? The conference itself will take over 2 days, but there is also a pre-conference day where lots of groups can get together around specific topics and also explore the local Austrian biotech landscape. We're covering 6 different areas this year, all of which are incredibly relevant for the commercial development of biotechnology. And within those thematic sessions, there are 12 program sessions, so you will not be short of things to do. The partnering will be live again this year, which is fantastic. So you'll be able to set up your meetings online before you actually arrive on site. And we have already over 70 speakers in the pipeline. So it will be a very intensive 2 days with hopefully a lot of space for partnering and networking and social interaction directly again. So if I have my next slide, please. So we're just looking at what the priority themes are going to deliver this year. This year's event is very much looking at how industrial biotechnology delivers commercially into the Green Deal and translates into a sort of economic and competitiveness reality for Europe. And from my own perspective, this is a really fantastic time for industrial biotechnology, with the Green Deal at European level really translating into pipelines for economic development. Industrial biotechnology is right there to deliver across all sectors, not only with novel products, that are generated through industrial biotech processes, but also processes themselves that can be applied into more traditional sort of petrochemical based manufacturing and process. So this is really our time to show what industrial biotechnology can do. And the sessions that we have really reflect that. Obviously, circularity and sustainability are always at the absolute heart of what we need to achieve and how we need to demonstrate that industrial biotechnology is a big player in here. Sustainable cities is something that we all look at because we've all seen the changes with the reduction in cars in many city centres and other ways of making cities more sustainable and healthy to live in. When you get onto the really technical aspect of industrial biotech and sustainability and bioeconomy, you can't get away from materials and packaging. They are in literally pretty much everything we do. And there's a huge scope for improving how industrial biotechnology can play a role in much more sustainable use of materials around us. Bioprocesses and technologies are also absolutely key. And this is where the very strong cross-sectoral amplification from industrial biotechnology will come. We should be looking across all sectors for how we can improve process development. And this is a central part of our sell into the Green Deal delivery. Food, feed, and nutrition are often places where industrial biotech is seen directly. You can give examples, and our own members have fantastic examples of products which are changing the way we develop our food processes and changing the way we look at our own nutrition. And finally, everything always comes back to money. We can't do this unless we can afford it. So, and as the session today will talk about, financing and investment are absolutely key to that. And this, we really look very much in Europe at both a combination of public and private investment and financing mechanisms. So I'm really excited to see the kind of representation we will have at EFIB from the people who are able to make our products work financially. So this year we will have hopefully over 400 delegates across our 12 sessions. We've already mentioned the partnering. New things for EFIB this year as well would be the executive roundtable that we're going to set up to bring together really senior managers from across the sector so that we can finalize and promote what we're calling the Vienna statement in 2021, where we see the future for industrial biotechnology delivering through industry. So don't forget, come to EFIB and bring your senior managers with them so they can be part of this executive roundtable. And very exciting for us this year is our 25th anniversary program. So Europa Bio is 25. We've been running since 1996, and our members are nominating breakthrough science business developments from industrial biotechnology over the past 25 years. And you, delegates at EFIB, will have the opportunity to vote for the ones that you think are most impactful. So it's a really nice opportunity to celebrate what has been great as biotech over the last 25 years and how we also look forward for the next 25 years. Where will we be at the end as we develop and unroll Green Deal technologies? So next slide, please. So I'll wrap up my very short tour of EFIB with how you guys can get involved. And I'm hoping to see everybody that's taking part in this webinar today, taking part in the actual event itself. There's lots of different ways that you can get involved. So I'm going to just run from the top. We're looking very much at the innovation side of things, and attendees through the academic pathway can present a poster free of charge. So don't forget to apply for that. Our Startup Village really champions early stage companies, and there are 20 free places available here. So you need to apply for that now, and we will make sure that you have all the information. And the deadline for that is the 16th of June. So we really look forward to seeing you there. To help you get started, we have some really great early bird rates. We also have an SME rate, which allows smaller companies to really make the most of the business development and the partnering available on site. There is a membership discount for all Europa Bio members. So if you are not already a Europa Bio member, I would say, why not? Don't forget now. And then you can also take advantage of the member discount. And finally, there is a discount for all Austrian delegates taking part through our brilliant co-host and host for the year, Lisa Vienna. So there's lots of ways you can get in. We have full cancellation is available until mid-July in case anything crazy happens that we're not expecting from COVID. But we are very confident that this event will go ahead this year and be one of the first events where everybody can come back together directly. And I am really looking forward to seeing everybody there. So I will wrap up now and hand over to the intellectual giants in our webinar today. So thank you very much indeed, and I will hand back to Agnes.
Thank you, Claire, for that overview. And indeed, there's a lot to look forward there. We will move on immediately to our fantastic speaker lineup for the webinar of today. And we will start with the industry perspective. And our next speaker is Cindy Gerhardt, who is Managing Director at Planet Bio at the Biotech Campus in Delft. And she will be giving some perspectives on collaborations and interactions between corporates and startups, amongst other things. And I hand over to you, Cindy, for your introduction and presentation.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and also thank you, Claire, for giving us an introduction on what's going to happen in Vienna. I think we're all super eager to meet in person again. Might be the first live conference coming up in this year. So thank you for the audience also for listening in. Let me move on to my first slide. I am talking on behalf of Planet Bio, which is an open innovation ecosystem for industrial biotech, and I will introduce that. But we are very closely associated with DSM. DSM was our birthplace, if you want. And DSM has also been a long, solid sponsor of the EFIB. So I can take care of both perspectives, and also later on in the question and answer session, I'll be able to put both bets on, which is giving me a nice double view on the topic of collaboration between big corporates like DSM and small startups that we are hosting at Planet Bio. So first, a little bit about our location. So we're on the Biotech Campus Delft, and Delft is in the Netherlands, and it's a really historical site for biotechnology. We've been running industrial biotechnology even before the word existed, since 1869. Making one of the first wet yeast factories for the baking industry. Well, that's over 150 years ago. DSM is, as you know, a big, huge global company, and they chose Delft for their global center headquarter for biotech research. So the building you're seeing here is a building housing almost 400 biotech scientists that have all the competences in biotech in place. They also have some 7 factories on this campus, and they're also the headquarters of the food and beverage business from DSM. DSM is very, very dedicated to creating a better world for the next generation, and they're also super dedicated to biotech, and they really feel that biotech has the potential to create a better future. And I think what is super nice is that in the Industrial Revolution 4.0, we see all this problem we as industrial people 3.0 created in terms of waste and climate and biodiversity and issues with food and health. Now we are entering an area where we return from a sort of a stupid, almost to say, fossil view on industry and shake hands again with biology. And I'm talking for the converted here. I realize that, but I'm super excited to see that more and more people see the immense knowledge biology provides and the immense opportunities when biology and technology shake hands. And what DSM is seeing, that this is such a fast moving space with so many breakthrough technologies. They can absolutely not cover that all by themselves. And for that reason, I think it's one of the companies that has been pioneering for a long time in collaborating with small companies. And yeah, it's always a bit of a discussion, corporates and startups. My God, how do you ever create a mix that works between such different species? I know now by experience running this ecosystem where we really every day work on collaboration between corporates and startups. It can work. I won't say it's always easy, but it definitely can work. And why? It's because there's a win-win. And like in life, with everything, if there's not a win-win, collaborations won't work. But corporates are looking for several things that startups can provide, and the other way around. For example, and it's just a list, but I think it's the most important ones. There's always investment opportunities. Corporates are more and more following the model that was already so established in the pharma industry that yeah, you need to share your risks and see your new technologies, and then start investing a little bit here and there to see how you can prepare for the future. Also, new technologies, as I just mentioned, particularly in industrial biotech and SynBio, are going so fast. No way they can keep up with that speed. They have a lot of good qualities, but speed is not one of them usually. They also are interested in limiting development costs. And I think not long ago, we still had many corporates with long-term research units or corporate science groups. These have been little by little disappearing with running business, becoming more and more focused on the short term. And therefore, yeah, you need to be careful to manage your development cost well. And then usually internal development costs are far higher than doing this in collaboration. And then there is this risk element that corporates are so strong at. They are champions in risk avoiding. Obviously, because they have big brands, they have huge markets, they have enormous risks to take care of. And doing something new and doing something radical is something that just does not fit with the philosophy of corporate per definition. So you want to outsource that. You still want to be, you're interested in those risky areas, but you don't want to do it yourself. And then there's this element of entrepreneurship. I think many corporates are struggling to find talents, young people that have an eagerness to have their own business or to be independent, to be thinking for themselves, and then fit that into an organization that is maybe far away from entrepreneurship because it's so huge and so segmented. And that's why collaboration can create an option for corporate people to see the entrepreneurship of small companies and sort of piggyback along, and that works really well in practice also. And then last but not least, there is this reputation thing. It sounds maybe a bit like a marketing story, but it's actually very, very important for corporates not to just sit on their own technology, but prove that they are open for outside changes. And then on the other side of the startups, yes, of course, there's sort of the opposite. The investment opportunity on one hand goes hand in hand with the need for money on the smaller companies. I think that all makes sense. We have at smaller companies usually a problem with scale, so it's good to have access to larger scale and knowledge about that. Also, the de-risking part is important because sometimes you simply don't have all those managerial systems in place that actually even make you aware of your risks. And then there's the increase in credibility. I need to speed up. I see my time is going faster than I'm talking. So what we did together with DSM and now independent from DSM, Create Planet Bio, we are dedicated to creating an interaction between big companies and small companies, but also between universities, research institutes, every business supplier and investor that wants to play a part in this game, we are welcoming in the ecosystem. We offer labs and offices on one hand, but we also provide this global support. I'm speeding up again. This is a view on the most recent picture of our ecosystem. We actually didn't start that long ago. We're busy with this about 2 years now. We are housed to 12 companies with a nice mix. You see, obviously, DSM as the big father, grandmother, whatever you call it, founding partner and owner of the campus, but also Centrient that is producing antibiotics and a pilot plant. Then we have joint ventures with also large parent companies, and then we have a bunch of small companies. On the support side, I will not go into the detail here. Feel free to contact me if you want to know more. But if I would say it very roughly, we provide financial support from pre-seed, seed to larger tickets. We provide technical support and business support. This is my last slide. So this is maybe the most interesting thing and really what the topic was about also. How does it really work? Is it working? Is it not working? Where are the risks? Where do we need to be careful of? And I'm very happy to say that although I also see it is a little bit of a hype with corporates running a lot of startup challenges and all shouting around that they are having an ecosystem and that they're part of startups and everything. If you do this correctly, and if you really put a team and effort and some money on this, it will work, and it is super powerful if you combine the two. So in our case, we see all startups benefiting from the fact that we are triple helix, so we have money from the government being put into our companies. We have several investment links and several ongoing investments from Regional Innovation Quarter investment company or DSM Venturing. We have more venture partners to come soon. We see a fantastic interaction between the science from DSM, from the TU Delft, and really a win-win. We also see a few things that to be careful of. Mostly it's time. It's definitely always the clock ticks at a different speed in a startup than it does in a corporate. So you have to be patient. It takes a lot more time to get your answer and to get your decision than you're used to. On the money side, I think we can talk about that in more detail, but be careful. Set clear milestones, take it little by little, and be very thoughtful of what you're doing together. And then on the paper, obviously, you probably all know that there's a lot of paperwork going on in corporates, more than you'll be used to. But it's also for good reasons, and do try to get a lawyer or something that supports you. And avoid to give away IP rights too early, because it's really not needed. And it's just a matter of pushing back. There are standards that will push you into an IP suboptimal condition. If you push back, they will find a way in between. Oh, that was a rush. That was a lot of things to tell. I have to stop here. Thank you very, very much for your attention. Happy to talk in more detail. Hope to see everybody in Vienna in the fall. And bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Cindy, for that great overview and for all the insights of all the work you're doing at Planet Bio. And as mentioned, feel free to put any questions you have also to Cindy in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll be coming back with the discussion once we've heard all the presentations. So thanks for now, Cindy, and we will now move on to the startup perspective with our next speaker, who is Amadeus Triando Anand Vinarno, who is co-founder and head of technology at Better Nature. And also, not to forget, the former startup winner at EFIB 2020, where we had over 30 innovative startups competing for this prize. So well done to Better Nature once again for that. So Amadeus will introduce Better Nature and also talk a little bit about issues around the support that's needed to really bring ideas from lab to market. So Amadeus, if you want to put on your camera, and I'm happy to hand over the floor to you now.
Yes, thank you very much, Agnes. So yeah, I'm Ando from Better Nature. We actually won the EFIB Startup Challenge in 2020, and we're very delighted to be invited in this panel. So yes, the main topic that we're going to speak about is what would startups need in terms of bringing innovation from lab to market. But first, let me give a context of what we do and how we get here. So with Better Nature, we do protein without compromise. We're the world's first food tech company focused on Tempeh fermentation to create what would answer these problems that we're showing. So the plant-based market is booming for a reason, for health and for cost mainly. But we felt that most meat-free products are filled with some ingredients that we personally don't want to eat every day necessarily. But when we look into the more natural ends of the products available in the market, we don't feel that it has the levels of the taste, the function, and nutrition that we were looking for. So seeing this gap in the market, Better Nature wants to be the brand that produces products with great taste and still all natural. And here we go, four of us, four committed friends for plant-based diet, playing around with Tempeh fermentation. So for those who don't know Tempeh fermentation, it's from Tempeh, about 300-year-old food from Indonesia, that it can basically increase the contents of any substrate by like 22% of the protein and reduces the fat in about 40%. And if we play around with the biotechnology aspect of it, we can add vitamin B12, vitamin D, change the texture and structures to make completely different meal alternatives and even food ingredients that we never imagined before. And that's exactly what Better Nature is doing. So we have our product range of meat alternative launched in the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands, and France, and very soon Ireland and Scandinavia. But this June, very excited to launch this new range. We have mince, we have smoky rashers, we have roast bites, we have kebab strips, we have barbecue ribs, all made using Tempeh fermentation to create the texture that is meat-like, but still all natural. And then more excitingly, again, we want to take our biotechnology R&D results into our next product. So I'm just gonna test this video. Or I should probably call for help so this video can play. Okay, but our upcoming better burger is a whole structured Tempeh burger made using fermentation, using wholesome beans to create a texture that we've never seen in Tempeh before. And then our next ingredient is something that would be applicable for the plant-based industry in terms of plant-based milk application, ice cream, cookies, bakeries, and confectionery. So with all those directions of fermentation, we have covered some pretty good traction especially in the UK market. So we're one of the top 3 products in Amazon UK. We've got almost 300 retailers in the UK, and now expanding again to Germany and France. And with offline as well, I mean, the food service area is currently delayed due to COVID, but we keep expanding by collaborating with different brands. And so on social media, again, just because it's our current target market, we try to go really, really fast with that, and very grateful for all the publications we received on that. Now let's get to the main point. So for the question from lab to market, what would the startups need? So if you look at this graphic, we imagine that if we position ourselves in the startup's shoes, what would be the most valuable thing that enable people to create startups? That would be how great the idea is and how well we execute realizing the idea, or how promising we will realize the idea. So it's a game of convincing people and proving milestones over time. But then the overall milestone that we look at is once we got a great idea, we go to our lab to experiment with it, to create prototypes, and then eventually we need to take into production in a scalable portion that can support to supply the market we're targeting. So every stage would have different needs, but then all of the summary is those on the bottom left. So startups need confidentiality, customizability, scalability, and product market fit resources. So if you can imagine in the Better Nature scheme, we even tried to set up a production plant to produce our product before we market it. But then it felt that, oh, the investment money is burning very fast every month and we can't afford it. So we need to create a revenue by opening up actually the last aspect. So the product market fit, we needed time and resource to make the testing. And meanwhile, we buy the time using the revenue we've already got so we can establish our high-tech inventions. And again, can you imagine if startup is losing the exclusivity of its invention, then the whole world of that startup is ruined. So we try really hard so the R&D stage can reach into a patentable stage, so we can secure an invention. Just because with the different power dynamics, we can be crushed if we lose that technology. Once we have the patent, we try to do proof of concept through prototyping, again at the same time trying to find our niche, how we can find the product market fit. And in doing so, in translating into production system, we still need that confidentiality, and it has something to do with, it sounds very simple, like non-disclosure agreement, but that is a very, very important component in the startup world. So, but then once we take into the production, the customizability, its importance increase dramatically, because if we just create something that other people are already creating, then we would not survive. We need a differentiation factor, and that really relies on how we can create something without spending a lot of money, and that means de-risking it, but still creating something that is different than any other people are doing. So we need protection, we need confidentiality and customizability. And once we find good prototypes, and at the same time we got, oh, this potential product market fit with some proofs, then we start to think about how we can scale it up, just because economy of scale plays as well. It is usually, it's always very expensive to produce prototype from the lab scale and from pilot production scale. But then when we speak about supplying the market, we need that scalability. So this is a very interesting question when I get asked to speak in this panel. What would startups need? And startups, like, at least for us, we never actually imagined that people are actually thinking of how we can help startups, because we feel like every day, like, oh, we need to do this problem solving. We need to get there without the scale and without the human resource that big companies have by yourself, whatever it takes. But then it's very, very relieving that to have such a supportive environment. And again, I enjoyed some part of this from the prize of being the EFIB Startup Challenge winner last year. So I spoke with Cindy, the previous speaker, and it's really helpful for startups just to know the way big companies work, just because we can learn about new things that these thinking framework what we didn't have before. But then when I went back and forth again with big companies, then I just realized what startups need are basically confidentiality, customizability, scalability, and product market fit, finding resources. So that would be all from me. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for this presentation that you gave. I see we have a question to you. Can you say a bit more about the production of tempeh and how you do it and with what?
Yes, so Tempeh fermentation relies on the growth of mold called Rhizopus. The genus is Rhizopus. The species is usually Oligosporus, is a variant of Microsporus or species. So this fungi would grow its mycelium penetrating into its substrate. The most common substrate is soybean. Once it penetrates the substrate, it would absorb the nutrition and transform it into the nutrients that they're producing. And for example, protein, just because protein is part of the mycelium. So you can actually increase the content of the protein by growing this fungi on top of your substrate and other nutrients. So our patents covered like incorporating different microorganisms, including bacteria, to be paired with this fungi. So it can produce other nutrients like vitamin B12 and vitamin D. And because it's this kind of fermentation, it allows the end product to still be considered natural. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks a lot. And apologies also, we weren't able to show the video that you had, but maybe we can, or you can either put it in the chat or we can circulate it together with the recap of the webinar afterwards.
Oh yeah, that's great.
So thank you
I'll put it in
again.
the chat.
Okay, super. So for the viewers, you will have one to see after the webinar. We will now move on to our third speaker, who is Rob van der Meij. Rob is partner at Capricorn Partners, and he will speak to us with a VC perspective on our topics of today. And I hand over to you, Rob, for an introduction of yourself further, of Capricorn Partners and your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. Thanks for this. So industrial biotech is the next stage coming. I've been active in the chemical industry for a little over 30 years now, and did my first steps in biotech in 2008, starting a company in the US called Kior, which was in the biofuels area. And after that, been active in this area as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and currently in the Capricorn Sustainable Chemistry Fund. So if I can get the next slide, please. So quick intro, Capricorn Partners. We are what we call a boutique asset management firm. We manage venture capital and listed equity funds, total about 700 million under management now. I work in the sustainable chemistry team, where we have 5 people with all a science, tech, engineering, business background. Actually, only one of us has done some financial education, because we invest typically a relatively early stage in chemistry, in biotech, companies that have a sustainability perspective. If we can go to the next slide. Our current portfolio, the fund started, say, January 2017, so 4 years active now. We have another 6 years to go on this fund. About half our portfolio currently is industrial biotech related. We have other investments in the polymer, the catalysis, and chemical and circular business industries. If I look at the different companies, I'll talk in the next slide about the what triggers us. Here they are. So what do we look at in an investment is, of course, the idea, the concept, the IP, and the capability of the team to execute. What we've seen in the market is that the market has been changing more to green drop-in molecules rather than producing molecules that are seeking a new application. In the past, that has been done a lot, where new materials, new molecules, new products, that's a very difficult area. What you see now today, and that is actually the benefit of the rise of industrial biotech technologies, that you can start to make green drop-in molecules. The advantage of that is that you have a credible market outlook, because these are existing markets with existing products in existing applications. That gives you a lot more outlook on your investment. At the same time, we do see that industrial biotech gives a lot of openings for new molecules, new ways of producing them, and new applications. The meat replacement and the proteins, of course, as a big example of that. So in the end, it comes down to can you do platform technologies that have multi-segment, multi-product potential, and what is the disruption potential and how relevant is that? If I go quickly through the biotech part of our portfolio, then DMC, I'll talk more about that in the next slides, but that's predictability at scale up. And with that, you get efficiency not only in the development cycle, but also in the use of your fermenter, and it makes proven molecules. Prolupin is an investment in a lupin protein intermediate. So that's really a new product. The company succeeded in making a consumer brand out of that in Germany. It's called Love. It's made with love. Great slogan. It's a dairy, not dairy, but dairy alternative. We invested to create the B2B side and now an expansion into other product segments. Trillium, maybe not technically industrial biotech because it's a catalysis process, but it's a good example of green chemistry where we take sugar into acrylonitrile and with that can create biocarbon fiber and bioacrylic fiber and bio-ABS, etc. Selecta, high-tech enzyme technology company, where they have a very proven development platform that they can leverage quickly into different product market segments in the food, pharma, and industrial applications. That's a strong growth company that we have. And Virovet, where industrial biotech is used as a method to produce plasmids, which is basically a vaccine precursor. And because of that, you can avoid the cold supply chain. Of course, today with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, everybody suddenly understands the importance of cold supply chains. And it's produced by fermentation, which actually saves eggs. We think about it as an odd thing, but a lot of vaccine production is done through eggs. And we can do that in a simple fermenter. Well, it's not the smallest, but it's not a very big one. So my next slide. In 2008, there was an environment with lots of investments in biotech, very high confidence, lots of money, especially in the US. That's why at that time I went to the US to start Kior, got money from Silicon Valley, very keen investors, proven success in the software and IT industries, trying to replicate that method into industrial biotech. And that failed spectacularly. A couple of companies got through it, and very big credits to them, to Lonzatec, to Enichem, Avantium, Amyris, Gevo. They all sustained. They came through the very difficult cycles. From an investment perspective, not so good for the original investors, since the dilution factor is written with 4 zeros in it. But in the end, these companies sustained and they're in the market now, and they're actually starting to make a dent in the market. So that's really good. But what you could see at that time, the drivers were, energy was one, but then solar became cheap, shale oil was developed, and the public also had some doubts about the food for fuel debate. Funny enough, that same public didn't bother too much about shale oil or gas use. So a little cynical perspective there. But that was 2008. So let's go forward to the next slide. Today, where do we stand? Much stronger drivers, much more diverse drivers, and also drivers that have a much wider support. DNA, the tools and the scripting, it's cheap, it's abundant, it has a very high promise. Now the promise can actually be a risk too, because some companies are promising really everything, but it's attracting plenty of money today. If you look at the SPACs recently by Ginkgo, the Zymergen IPO, Amyris fundraise, those are spectacular numbers. And it's really a very good achievement of these companies to do that. ESG, 5 years ago when we started our fund, we were received very cynically in the market, very skeptical. Like ESG, is that a real driver? Is that really coming? Circularity, blah, blah, blah. And now you see it's a mandatory investment thing. There's lots of money coming into the market. that gets an ESG label, which is not truly an ESG label. So we got to stay very critical to that. Consumer demand. Consumers are starting to drive industrial developments now. So the meat replacements is one, which actually don't have a health benefit, which a lot of people think. There's no calorie benefit in most cases. It's an environmental play, but it's good that it's happened. It looks at the circularity, the healthy foods, the sustainability part. European Green Deal, and recently the US woke up with the Biden deal coming into play. So really good by Europe to start to promote this on a serious base with longer term money. The recent events in the world, the Suez Canal blocking, but also, of course, the whole COVID pandemic showed you the issue that you have with running long-range supply chains and new players in the market with lots of money. So let's go to the next slide. Looking at time, I think I need to go a little quicker. This is DMC, a breakthrough in scale-up, where actually the micro fermentation to the lab scale fermentation to the pilot scale that was done in Delft, by the way, at the BPF plant. Great work by the folks there, into the commercial scale reactor at EW, where it shows predictability across every scale. And this despite serious process hiccups like pH drift, glucose overdose, in the typical fermentation that would have killed your yield. But in the DMC robust process that they have developed, this stays the same. So this is for an amino acid. I'm talking about an amino acid on the next slide. Looking at the life cycle analysis, what industrial biotech you can bring. People think amino acids are products produced by nature. Well, some are, but not all. Actually, alanine is made from petroleum. It's a butene-based product turned into maleic anhydride, into an aspartic acid, and then into an alanine. The last step, 2 steps, are enzyme-based, but all the other steps are classical, good old petrochemical industry places. DMC makes it from DE95, a glucose stream, straight into alanine. If you take the CO2 effects into account, the manufacturing electricity used in China is coal-based, heat the same, feedstock costs, transportation, you take the CO2 footprint, you can actually get a 90% reduction in the CO2 footprint by going industrial biotech or a product like this. We think that's quite a spectacular achievement. So that tells you what you can do here. Next slide. CO2 pricing, this is really coming into play. Yesterday, Shell, got the news that they have a mandatory requirement to try to reduce CO2. Whether that holds in court is a question, but Exxon feels the heat too, with an activist director being nominated and actually approved in the board now. Carbon pricing running up to 50 euros. And when we started this fund, they were 4 or 5 euros. And also everybody there said, carbon pricing, that will never come. Well, here we are, last week, 55 euros. And people realizing there's a shortage. What you see in the bottom is the trading volume. And it actually starts to become a serious play. Next slide. So the new players in the market, the Zymogen, the Ginkgos, the Emerus, the Twist Bioscience, they're all in there. They're making products. They're getting revenue. They're coming into the market. Let's go next. To the next slide. Yes. So this shows you that there are many opportunities for the industrial biotech world in molecules and strains and services, but still downstream processing. People can make 1 molecule, maybe they can make 10 molecules, but to make really substantial quantities of molecules in 1 ton, 100 tons, 1,000 tons capacities, you really need to have downstream processing technologies to get the quality, to get the volume, but also to get the cost right. And that's still an area where in the industrial biotech, a lot of improvements have to be made. So far, a lot of the technologies are pretty standard, pretty old-fashioned. They work, but they're costly, they're spacious. They take a lot of attention. A couple of companies coming on the horizon, DAB and Holyfirm with novel downstream process technologies for separation. So really good to see innovation coming into that space. But then I come to what we call the hot potato, the chemical corporate. Some players, credit for DSM, credit for the Corbions, they're active. They've been consistently active in this space. But the traditional chemical companies, come on. I think it's a laughable position that some of these players take by not taking industrial biotech serious. And they run a real risk because, remember the postal companies, none of them stepped into email. But also when people talk about in the chemical industry, yeah, but it's more expensive, blah, 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 blah. Well, the first car was not cheaper than a horse. So innovation doesn't start with going for the cheapest. It starts to go for a better solution. And that's where the world is coming into now, into that reality that we need better solutions. And we strongly believe industrial biotech can bring that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rob, for your presentation. And I see in the chat that we have a question for you. What are the strongest USPs that Capricorn is looking for in a potential investment? New molecules or new type of platforms? And this question comes from Karin Fleck.
Well, usually we know it when we see it, so it's a good question. It's difficult to answer. Typically, it's in the end it's all about say how strong is the concept, how strong is the ID, how strong is the IP around it. Is it credible? Is it defendable? Does it have does it have enough reach in the market? We can invest quite early stage, and we're not afraid to do so. But we got to have an outlook. It doesn't have to be crisp and clear, but there got to be a sense of reality. If people want to, to go in 3 years to 100,000 ton plant. We get very skeptical. So there's not one USP. The disruptive potential and say the credibility and sense of reality are probably the initial triggers.
Thank you. And with that, I will ask, we've reached the end of the presentations, and I will ask all our panelists to come back to the stage. So Cindy and Amadeus. We also had a question in the meantime for Cindy, but I see this question has been answered via the chat on the legal status of Planet Bio as a non-profit foundation. So do we have all our speakers? I see, yes, Cindy and Amadeus there. And to all of the people who have dialed in, you can continue to put your questions via the Q&A function here that you see just on the right-hand side. So thanks a lot for giving your presentations, and I will start with an opening question to you, which is a bit broader, and it's around your perspective on the current state of cooperation between corporates, investors, and startups, and also did the pandemic change anything in the relation of the different stakeholders? And maybe I start with you, Cindy.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I have to say, in Delft, we haven't seen much trouble with the pandemic, besides all being bored and working from home and not meeting. So on the side of having nice events, yes, we were hampered a little bit, but on the side of the business, actually very little. We've seen good investments made. We've seen solid growth of the companies in Delft. We lost one company because they were explicitly developing something for the office food. That of course was tough, but yeah, we've also seen many companies actually profiting from Corona and everything that is around it. Like company in Delft called Nostics, they're developing a fast Corona test. and they've been growing really, really fast. So I think at least for, and also then if I look at a DSM perspective, also we've had solid growth in DSM, and yeah, to be honest, in our segment, very little problems with the pandemic.
Thanks, Cindy. Rob, do you want to also give your views on this question?
Well, the pandemic made us definitely work harder. You know, we lost all the downtime due to travel inefficiency. So, you know, no chance to read in the airplanes, no chance to linger around airports and do nothing. It's been work, very efficient meetings, you know, Teams, Zoom, all these platforms, but actually great. I mean, now you also see what time you wasted traveling. Of course, before that there was Skype, but the acceptance of video team meetings is now kind of universal, and it actually makes you reach out earlier and more efficient, and you can have lots more discussions. You miss, of course, the personal contact, and when it comes to more complicated discussions around strategy and other types, you really need to get back into the personal play. There on the corporates and startups, yeah, we see good and bad things in those corporations, and sometimes it's around attitude, sometimes it's around misfits. We always try to stimulate our portfolio companies to make sure you understand the business case. You should make sure you understand the driver, you know, and make sure how relevant it is on the scale of the corporate that you talk to. You know, make sure they put real skin in the game in terms of time, attention, and money. Otherwise, don't waste your time.
And turning to you, Amadeus, can you say a few words more in detail about some of the collaborations and partnerships that have helped you at Better Nature to reach where you are today? And feel free also if you want to comment a bit on the past year now in pandemic times.
Absolutely. So we actually climbed, or actually crawled out of the dark hole of just ideas using competitions. So thinking about competitions, it's some part of it is a way to de-risk our journey, but by exposing ourselves to risk of losing, risk of changing our ideas completely, risk of being challenged that we haven't figured out what is truly essential. And yes, we got some failures, but then every win from the previous competitions really helped us to move forward in terms of reputation and resource and confidence with what we're doing. And so we start up from the University of Cambridge by Global Biotech Revolutions competition. It's called the GAP Summit, and then we jumped to the TWB Protein Summit. We jumped into, and now we got the Eurostars Grand. That was super helpful, and then the EFIB, and then the Good Food Institute, the conference, the startup pitching competition. So we literally jumped from one competition to another, and then in every jump we got our ideas crushed, our confidence crushed, but for great reasons, and it's really humbling as well. And then, very interestingly, one of the biggest contributors in collaboration is my family company. So my grandfather has been quite known in Indonesia as the father of food science and technology. So we got this food lab in Indonesia that would be willing to help the startup and in the business like terms and conditions to help jumpstart the R&D process until we got to the patentability process. So things like that we didn't see it coming, but just by trying to find however it takes to get to these important milestones, but definitely collaboration is critical.
And what about, I wanted to pick up also on Cindy's presentation, and you spoke about several factors and rationales for corporates and startups working together. Can you also say a bit about the challenges? I mean, the cultural differences, maybe their different methodologies, philosophies, and so on. And how do you approach such issues?
Yeah, definitely. I like what Alan was just saying on humbling, on the effect that if you start to collaborate with other species in this world, usually what you see is that your own tunnel view is a little bit too narrow, and that happens, interestingly enough, both and in small companies but also in big companies, because we all tend to believe that what we see on a daily basis is reality, which is not necessarily the case, and especially I think in how to handle innovation, how to handle research, how to deal with structured approaches and systems. It's completely different. And then we tend to think that what you do is the right thing. But it's humbling and inspiring at the same time, both for corporates and for startups, to see how the other do it. And we've seen really good examples. And I'd like to mention one. When we started with Planet Bio, I was a bit afraid myself that the corporate world of DSM as a big neighbor on campus would be a bit scary, and maybe even push companies away, small companies away, because they have lots of rules, and yeah, it's really different than what we're used to in startup life. But I've seen such beautiful marriages, because at a certain moment you have to start de-risking, and if you want to go for scale, and if you want to go for size and for market introduction, you have to start thinking differently. And then it can be super useful to have somebody around that can help you out with management quality systems and stuff like that, even if it's a tiny version of that what corporates use. Other way around, for the corporates, I've seen very sleepy people that were very, let's say, negative about opening up an industrial campus, and that will never work, and how are we dealing with the rules. Those are now my biggest champions, because they got an enormous amount of energy from the entrepreneurship that happens on the campus now. So yes, there are differences, but I find it far more interesting to see the synergies that can arise when you collaborate.
Do you want to react to that, Amadeus, from your perspective in a startup?
Yes, absolutely. So from the startup, when we started something from zero, interestingly, we go through phases that make us understand, oh, this is the reason why big companies have the system in place. This is the reason why you need an HR, just because managing all these companies by yourself on top of your main responsibilities, it takes a lot of energy. So I think that process is humbling, that process is affirming of what big companies are doing. But then also the fact that you started something from zero with the possibility of that completely failing, which is fair enough. It's fair, reasonable to fail the startup with a chance and probabilities. The cause and effect link is very strong. So if I don't do this, the startup wouldn't get this, and the startup wouldn't survive. So probably next year I wouldn't have a job. So I would just do anything needed in this such a crunch time. And not speaking about compensation even yet, just because in those early days, we just believe in the valuation startup would pick up. It is fine that we stayed in somebody else's basement, that we truly did. And it's fine if you got stranded in a different country. I was starting Bad Nature while doing PhD, and we just needed to do it. So, but then as the startup gets more settled, I would say, like even now after we raised a seed, fundraising, things are thought to be very different. Delegation takes to be more important than ever. Just we can't do everything by ourselves anymore. Again, we start to find a balance and calm. Oh, things are getting more structured. We got actually work hours like big companies. It feels amazing. But then finally, the anxiety of no, there should not be calm like this. There must be something. Sometimes it stays. So I think that's interesting to have this time access to this experience. But then, like Cindy said, it's more interesting to discuss about the possible synergy between both. I completely enjoy the journeys in both.
Thank you both. We've also got some questions coming in via the chat, and maybe I encourage the participants to use the Q&A function for the questions so that everyone can see them. But there were a few questions following up to Rob's presentation. So from Hans van der Poel, Rob, where does the CO2 price need to be to create a level playing field with many fossil chemicals? And there was also a point from Iris Cornet, who said, I recently heard a lot of people say that industrial biotech using microorganisms is not that CO2 low, and asking if that's a drawback.
Okay, so where does the CO2 price need to go? I'm not sure if I know a number. There's a couple of aspects. I think the CO2 price is a good driver. If people also start to restrict the CO2 allowances that certain companies and industries today have. Governments have given a lot of free allowances to a couple of large companies. So that's one thing. The other thing is in the US, the fossil fuels industry is still supported by tax advantages with very high write-offs. So that's something that need to change too. And then I think you start to get balance between fossil fuel versus say sugar, second generation sugar feedstocks combined with CO2 as a pricing element. So it's not just CO2 pricing, it helps the driver to do that. On the CO2 balance of industrial biotech, it's a good point. Not all products have that good of a CO2 balance. So you really have to look into that against what type of products do you compete. And I think for people going into industrial biotech, that's something to think about. Because some feedstocks have an enormous water footprint, which doesn't make it right. Some feedstocks require lots of nutrients, which doesn't make it right. So it's not the solution that solves it all. It is an element of a suite and a set of solutions. Same as the traditional chemical industry has lots of very efficient processes, and people underestimate that. They look at ethylene and they talk polyethylene is bad, blah, blah. But actually polyethylene is one of the most efficient molecules made in the industry. And it has tremendous use benefits. And so you got to balance the use benefits versus the production costs there. There needs to be more balance. But if you think about polyurethane as a bad molecule, well, think about how much energy polyurethane saves in isolation forms. And so you got to look at the balance of the benefits of use versus the downside of production. And of course, you got to minimize the downside of production. And if you can do it better, there should be incentives to do it better. And I think CO2 pricing now starts to come into play. At 50 euros, there are some companies that will start to feel some pain. And you know, industry moves when the pain gets higher. And for some companies, when you start to threat their license to operate, it becomes a real issue. And don't forget, a lot of companies do not invest driven by revenue growth, but driven by compliance and defensive mechanisms. And that's the part where they need to feel the pain, and then it starts to go.
I see here also another question for Rob, but before, I'm just looking at the other panelists, if anyone else would like to comment on this one. No. So we have a question from Vanessa Smith, who says to Rob, I was told that a lot of investors are not interested in investing in service-driven companies. What do you think? How did it come? Ginkgo managed to get so much money by investors?
So yeah, it's a good question. We have invested, the venture capital industry in general doesn't have a great success with service-driven businesses, but when you look at Ginkgo, it's quite a unique service, which has a unique know-how set and needs a unique amount of capital, and you should be able to suffer a unique amount of losses for several years to come into that business. Don't forget, look at the timeline and the amount of cash that it takes them to get where they are today, and they're still not at break even. And if you think about what will be the return time for investors on this, it may not be a typical VC play. Services, I think, when they're unique and driven by a structure that's not easy to copy, can be quite a good investment. And the ginkgo and Zymergens might be in that space. The future will tell. We've also invested in service-driven companies because through that service know-how they could generate a product and a suite of products that became unique. Selecta started as a service company in the enzyme space. And after doing that service for a couple of years, they became so good at it when they thought like, well, why putting our destiny in the hands of a couple of customers when we can take control of our destiny by making some products ourselves. You of course have to separate and have pretty good say targets of areas that you do not compete with your customers in that area. But Selecta has turned from a service company into a product company. But when the services are unique, I mean, we've invested in DNA services through our our ICT fund in Bluebee from the University of Delft. And we had a pretty nice exit on that. So it's some service companies are good to invest in, like some product companies are good to invest in.
Thank you. I wanted to move on to another topic for our panel, which is around corporate innovation challenges and how you perceive this trend, or call it the popping up of increasingly many corporate innovation challenges with targeted needs or solutions that are requested from the outset. For example, with DSM has been doing this with this meat replacement innovation challenge, for example, which was about developing an innovative solution that can help mimic the real meat experience. Cindy, can you say a bit more about your perspectives on this?
Yeah, more than happy to. And I think this is it's excellent that you put it on the agenda for the webinar, because I can imagine that people start to lose a little bit the overview, because there's so many startup challenges and it's so hot, and you could spend your day and night on this, which is definitely not what you should do. It's fashionable, and I think it is very much related also to our field and to the big disruptive changes that are coming up with more focus on sustainability, and corporates that run these challenges, they don't have a very healthy pipeline to become more sustainable. So they're really looking for the young and innovative, disruptive companies to help them. Now, having said that, if you are a young and disruptive and innovative company, you are not meant to be helping corporates necessarily. You are basically for yourself, and you should choose very, very carefully which corporate can help you, or which corporate does want to make advantage of you. And I am, I have to say, I am very positive about the way DSM is handling this, because also because I think we were pushing very much. Let's be very strict on the scope of this meat replacement challenge. So as soon as you see a challenge with a very broad scope, be a little bit careful, because it smells like a party that just wants to learn what's going on and is not necessarily looking for you as a unique startup. So the scope needs to be very, very clear. It needs to fit also in the strategic direction of the company running the challenge, because you don't want to be spending your precious time on a challenge for a company that, instead of reading a paper, is doing a challenge because it sounds so fashionable. So the outcome and the prize that you can win with this challenge is an important thing to look at also. What does it give me as a startup? Is it just money? Is that then really what you're after? Is there not another way to get money? Because it's usually also not that much money. Or is it a true collaboration with a company that gives you a lot of knowledge or application know-how that you don't have? So if that 1 + 1 = 3 element is in there, it's a really cool way to connect to a corporate that otherwise would not bother to even see you. But yeah, be very, very, very critical on what they offer as a price and what they give in as part of the collaboration.
What do you think, Rob? Would you have anything to add to what was said by Cindy on this topic?
Well, I think Cindy has the benefit of working for a company that has a long history of innovation and made a real transformation from, say, classical chemistry to modern nutrient high-tech material company. DSM has a strong innovation culture. So if you see challenges in the market from companies that do not have a strong innovation culture, I would be very wary. In these categories, you have the good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly ones are the ones that they put their problem that they have for 25 years and couldn't solve it themselves, and they put it out on the open, and they give you $10,000 if you solve it for them. Like, great. That I would stay away from that unless you want to amuse yourself, then I would use it for that. I think that's a very cheap way some corporates operate. The good ones, like I said, DSM is one, but also Procter & Gamble. They're used to have open innovation more as a culture, as a tool, and innovation is a driver for them to stay in business. If a consumer goods company like Procter doesn't innovate, they're out of business in a couple of years. So these companies that have that culture, those are the ones I think are the ones to take serious. And there's a group in between that is looking, as you said, it's a window on the world. It's a bit of a scouting thing, but it's also learning. Some corporates just have to learn to go through the cycle. But for me, when you cooperate with a corporate, it's either that you use them as a test case for yourself, and then, hey, make use of them. They got lots of knowledge, so you extract the knowledge from them instead of the other way around. Ask them about the market. You'll be surprised how much people will tell you. And so as a startup, use that. There's lots of know-how you can get out of that, so go for it. But if you really want to cooperate, make them have skin in the game. And when the cooperation doesn't work, make sure it has some pain. That's the only way to drive that. I wouldn't be shy. Be bold.
And I also wanted to move to you, Amadeus, again with because at Better Nature you launched a crowdfunding campaign not so long ago, and it really went very well, and you reached a target in record time, I believe. So can you say a bit more about the learnings from that and how you will use the funding that came in?
Thank you, Agnes. So definitely there was a lot to learn from the process, and doing the crowdfunding was not like what I thought would be. So initially, before doing that, I thought crowdfunding is purely random people would invest in us, whoever found ourselves on the website, right? But then no, actually, we got some strategies, like who would be the first people we approached, and that would be value investors, just because it's a precious space to have some part of the share in the company. So we want only valuable institutions, people who can help accelerate the growth of the business to the right direction to occupy that share of the shares. So we built up in about 3 hours as long as we launched, because we have so many people that we had contacted beforehand, pre-registered for that. So even before we launched it, we didn't change the date of the launch. Oh, let's expedite this, so we break the record of 3 hours. No, but then we can monitor that. Oh, it's looking absolutely amazing. 100 of people pre-registered, including value investors. So in crowdfunding, there's actually a balance of purely random people to create the hype that would contribute to our marketing end of the business, to have people more a sense of ownership of the products in the market that we're targeting in the UK and the Europe, and as well as the value investors that we know, okay, with the purpose of expanding the market, we need someone who can be our mentor from credible institutions to lead expanding these channels. That, I think that's in a nutshell.
Anyone else of the panelists who want to comment on the crowdfunding setup?
Oh, we think crowdfunding is one of the instruments in the market, and for companies that are active, say in consumer space, or like something more tangible, it makes a lot of sense. We've seen success in the bikes markets, in the goods markets, and in the foods markets. You know, if you go to, say, an industrial development, it becomes a difficult play. You also got to look at the potential risk. If you're a company that has a serious, say, development risk that is not so easy to explain to people who are not knowledgeable or not experienced in technology development. If you have crowdfunding with 200 people in the crowd, you also have a social media risk of 200 people with each 500 contacts. So that can multiply pretty quickly, both to the good and to the bad. But I think for companies that have a tangible, say, consumer benefit, it's a good instrument to have.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I'm looking in the Q&A. I don't see any further questions for the moment. So maybe just one or two last questions from my side. So to pick up also on what you were speaking about, Rob, with the 10-year perspective on industrial biotechnology and the different drivers that are there today, you listed many of them, including reduced costs, consumer demand driving industry, policy and regulation, and so on. Is there any one of those drivers that you think is particularly important, also looking ahead towards the future?
Well, before I got into the biofuel space, I was active in refining technologies. And we did a look into refining technologies, like what drives investment in refining technology, and it was compliance. So regulations, you know, I mean, the world is now driving on low sulfur fuels. I remember when I started in this industry, the fuel level in diesel was 2000 ppm. Then it got down to 500 ppm, and the whole refining industry was like, oh, we're going to die if you do this. You know, we cannot afford this, blah, blah, blah. 10 years later, they had to go to 10 ppm, and it was again the same story. Oh, we cannot afford this. And, you know, regulators can drive this. If you want to have change the regulation, because that hurts the license to operate of a corporate, that hurts the license to operate, to be in a business. So if you want change, you got to regulate it. You know, that's the biggest, fastest driver of everything. Incentives are good as enablers, and incentives helps, you know, the startup companies. But if you really want to drive change, regulate it. You know, that's the biggest thing you can do.
Yeah, indeed, very important point. Would Cindy or Amadeus, do you agree, or would you like to comment on the point of drivers as well? Maybe Cindy first.
Yeah, I like Rob's comment. I mean, obviously there are multiple drivers, and they're all very, very valid. But in order to make this driver also really effective, I fully agree that regulation is absolutely crucial. And yeah, in that respect, we see some changes in Europe, but we're not there yet. So I don't know if anybody in the audience is hearing this, but and is in the space of influencing regulation. But I definitely think that this should be broader seen. And of course, we can say, and we heard that yesterday in the Shell case, we are listening to our consumers. Yes, we listen to our consumers, but the consumers only see what is regulated. And if you want to drive change, you have to start to help that what is being seen. And I think in that sense, the whole part on communication is incredibly important and also incredibly risky when it is turning to false news space. But the movement towards, for example, the whole meat alternatives space is definitely also driven by a change in consumer acceptance of animal cruelty and planet cruelty. And I think, yeah, the way we saw the world reacting to Seaspiracy documentary, for example, is quite impressive. And the use of social media can be super powerful. On the other hand, also extremely dangerous is if it goes wrong. So in order to see if that can be regulated too, I mean, that's a complicated matter. I think that will determine a lot where we are going to in the future.
Indeed, thanks, Cindy. Would you like to briefly comment as well from a startup perspective, Amadeus?
Yes, very briefly. So I think it has something to do with how people on Earth develop new habits. And based on the current habits we kind of see, we'll be able to foresee or predict what people would need in the future more. So as long with the development of social media, people getting more connected than ever, the information exchange is increasing, and also people's knowledge, well, being misinformed is very unfortunate, but then the general knowledge expanding. And like Cindy said about the sustainability concern, is because people become more and more aware of the environmental impact of what they consume. And then during COVID too, in the food industry, we actually experienced steep increase in sales. So we didn't actually realize that COVID made people to try to get healthy foods more. At least that's what we experienced in the UK, and in the most conventional and in the most convenient way. So our most convenient products, like ready to heat, ready to cook, the sales went skyrocket, and during the pandemic. So I think it's because of the habits. And yes, of course, there are many other factors that we ourselves don't experience, but then we definitely see increase in people's knowledge and habits. Oh, and also the pain. Whatever the aspect is, when people pain there, that means there's a need, and that requires solution, that requires innovation.
Great.
Agnes, can I add one thing to my statement?
Yes, of course.
Because the ESG is an important driver, and it drives through the shareholders in the financial industries. If you look back at some other transformations in the world, they were driven by the financial industries. Regulation is a part of that, but ESG is starting to become, as I mentioned, almost a mandatory item in investments, but you don't see consistency and adherence to that. We decline investment opportunities, despite that some of these are very good, but they have an aspect that has a negative ESG part. Like, for instance, 5% of the business is related to military industry, or 5% of the business is related to tobacco industry. In those cases, despite all the other 95% being right, we do not invest. Now, that's the thing that needs to change in some of the corporate attitudes, that if you say you're a green oil and energy company, that you do not drill in Alaska, and you do not drill in natural land habitats. That's the thing. It's about what you do, but it's also especially about the things you do not do or no longer will do. And that's the changing part that needs to get there. And ESG helps on that, definitely.
Very good point. Thank you for adding that, Rob. And I'm looking at time. I'm looking at the panelists in case there's any brief final remark you would like to make before we close. and maybe one thing that you're looking forward for EFIB 2021. Cindy.
Absolutely. I already mentioned that I absolutely look forward to it. And I just decided the other day that I will take my whole team and use it as a little bit of an outing. We'll take the train, not to even consider ever taking the plane again for a European trip. And we'll make the best out of it. So looking forward to meet you and Vienna.
Super. Amadeus? Any
Yes,
last
for
words
startups
briefly?
and yes, so for startups and companies who want to work with startups, I would like to encourage people in the startup teams to really know what your innovation is, to really understand what only you would know how to crack it. So you can embrace these competitions, and incubate this collaboration with confidence, not being afraid of being infringed IP-wise, getting your secret leaked. So get to know that, and to achieve that, it takes a failure. So when you spend yourself in the lab, when you experiment room, like those pains and failures would pay off with the confidence, so you can embrace these opportunities that can leverage what you're doing.
Thank you. And Rob, 10 seconds.
I made my point already, no worries.
Okay, good. So with that, then we are going to close today's webinar. Thank you so much again to everyone who tuned in. Thank you very much to DSM and Planet Bio for co-hosting this webinar with us today. And we hope to see you all at the EFIB 2021 in Vienna. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions in follow-up to the webinars or regarding any of the presentations that were made. And we look forward to see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.